Hi everyone, it's Thatcher Kamen here on behalf of NCTM, and today I'm joined by Sarah Fuentes and Theresa to talk about the books 5 Cubed D and the 5 Practices, focusing on guidance and tips to support productive small group work, classroom discussions, and the transition to online learning. And so welcome Theresa and Sarah. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Theresa, let's talk about the 5 practices. What are they, and how is implementing the 5 Ps online different than in a face-to-face classroom?
So the 5 practices are this amazing structure built by Smith and Stein, all about anticipating student moves, monitoring them in the classroom, selecting and sequencing very purposeful student representations, and then having a wonderful discussion where we bring out all these lovely representations, student thinking, and connecting them to one another and our overall math goal. There has been a lot of discussion and thoughts about the 5 practices and why they're useful. I've been using them in the online setting and specifically looking at what's different in the online setting and how do we maintain the integrity of the 5 practices in the online setting. A couple things that I found that were different in terms of anticipation is that not only do you need to anticipate all the different student strategies for this task, but you also need to anticipate the technology tools, the manipulatives, the virtual manipulatives, maybe drag and drop manipulatives. You need to think about the physical manipulatives, such as spaghetti and Cheerios for base 10 models. And you even need to think about paper pencil manipulatives and how they will add all those representations online. So thinking about all of those things up front, how you'll select the manipulatives that they're going to use, or are they going to have full selection? And so that does require a lot more planning. However, the monitoring stage, I personally find a little bit easier. And there's some reasons why. Instead of walking around the classroom and seeing what students are doing, instead I'm able to move between breakout rooms, listen in on what students are thinking, and at the same time multitask and look at the slides of other groups. So now I can monitor other groups while listening in and purposefully questioning a different group. So that gives me some flexibility in overseeing more of my class and more of the thinking as it's going on. The other part about monitoring is online, because there's a space for all students to have a voice, I get more representations. And I'm talking a lot more representations. It's not just the kid with the nicest handwriting who gets to share their representations or the one holding the marker. It's everyone, because they all have access to those collaborative slides. These selecting, sequencing, and connecting are relatively the same. You're just telling students to join me on slide 23 as opposed to look over at this poster. But you're still using the same questioning moves and bringing those topics together.
That's great, Theresa. Very insightful on the differences between online and face-to-face classroom discussions. So, Sarah, if teachers have tried small group work in the past and felt that it was not effective, what can they do differently?
Well, I think one of the important things is that when you have kids first get in small groups, often they're not going to know what the expectations or norms are for working in small groups. So it's our job as teachers to work with them to establish those norms, establish those expectations, and it's not going to happen just in one class. Whether you're face-to-face or you're online, it's that type of change takes time and commitment as a teacher to work with students. And there's different ways that this can be done. You can do this through explicit instructional strategies, where early on in the school year, you collaboratively with your students establish class norms and expectations for small group work. You could discuss sentence starters for how they can communicate with each other and post those on a wall in your classroom. And then I think what's really critical is implicit strategies as well. And sometimes those are overlooked. So these implicit strategies are what you do when you're in class with a small group and actually interacting with that group. What do you say? How do you ask your question? And those interactions establish class norms, so they can be both positive and negative class norms, right? So if a group calls you over and asks you a question and you answer the question, you're starting to establish that norm that you're just going to give them the answer, right? Whereas if a group called you over and you can say, can you please explain your thinking to me? You're establishing this class norm that it's the student's role to express their thinking and articulate their thinking and clarify it for you and their peers. So I think one of the often overlooked ways to help students is these implicit approaches.
So Theresa and Sarah, teachers have so much to teach and so little time to teach it. Why should they implement rich tasks and discussions, and should they always implement high-level tasks?
Sure, absolutely. I get this question a lot, especially since we've had the spring and this disruption in the traditional sense of a face-to-face classroom. There are some ways that you should consider using rich tasks. The 8 math teaching practices basically address every single reason why you should use it here. They're going to build on conceptual understanding. They're going to build on productive struggle. We're going to build on meaningful discourse and actually using the student evidence in the discussions. These 8 math teaching practices have been established, and using rich tasks, we can address all of those. In addition, if you're worried about time, you can address this task throughout the unit. If you did a task and the students were invested in it and they really understood it, when you 3 days from now talk about a slightly different topic, you can bring that back and talk about how it compares. At the end of the unit, you can reassess them with the task and see the way that they grew. And since all of these topics are linked together, you can bring it up in the geometry unit, the algebra unit. And when you see how often you can bring it up again and the quick way that students make that conceptual understanding to it and are grounded in this thought about what is it we're talking about more than just numbers, you're going to get more bang for your buck.
And Sarah, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, your tasks are going to indicate what goals are or align with goals and expectations. So if you have a particular learning goal for your students, you want to align the task with that. I think too, if we start talking about small groups working on rich or high level tasks, the nature of the task is going to dictate the type of communication or discourse that they have with each other. So if you have lower level tasks performing procedures, a lot of the questions are going to center on what did you get, how did you do it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a very good first step for student conversation. But if we incorporate high level tasks, students will move beyond that, and we can help them learn to ask questions like, how did you do it? But then they actively listen to that response. They have an opportunity to evaluate how student work, compare student work, potentially provide alternate strategies. So rich tasks open up the type of communication that students will have. So if our goal is ultimately for students to evaluate each other's work, listening to the thinking of the others, comparing their strategies, if we want students to do that, we need to incorporate those high-level tasks. Now, one caveat to that is when you first have students working in small groups, you might want to do a lower level task. I wouldn't say live in them for a very long time, but if it's tasks that students are familiar with, at least we get them starting to talk. We get them asking questions of each other. But then we want to, once we get those low level questions, what did you get? How did you do it? We want to move them to those higher level questions, which will require transitioning to higher level tasks.
That is very informative and great insight, Sarah. Theresa, what if students don't like to use the microphone? How should teachers hold those types of discussions?
I think Sarah set up this answer very well, that sometimes we balance low-level tasks, high-level tasks. If I'm purposefully trying to teach students about my routines, how to love the microphone, and how to interact as a group, I might bring the cognitive load down a bit so that they can focus on those new skills and routines of being in a group. If students don't like to use the microphone, we give them opportunities with lower stakes and higher opportunities to learn to love it. Some of those include multiple modalities. So microphone isn't the only way that we hear student voice. It can be a text box on the slide, manipulatives on the slide, screenshots of what you're doing in the moment. A lot of teleconferencing softwares have chat boxes, and those chat boxes are used across education as a lighter, more casual conversation, so that the microphone might be more academic. Students can use images, they can use videos to convey what they're thinking instead of using their words. And then the other thing with the routines online is you can do routines such as pair share to get students to talk more. If I have 0 students who want to talk, or I have over 10 students that want to talk, what that tells me is they need to be in small groups to think about the situation some more. So I'll do pair share if there's crickets in the classroom to get them thinking. Students don't hide as much when they're in a pair, and they're more likely to talk. And then I also include the routine of share what your partner had said. That brings the stakes lower and gives them more opportunity to love the microphone. As they show that they're able to use the microphone more, they're showing more responsibility in the breakout rooms. I increase the number of students in a room and increase the time that they're in the rooms.
Yes, it is so great that there are tools like chat boxes, pair share, and videos that can also be used online for students to convey their responses and help boost engagement. Sarah, if teachers have tried breakout rooms in the spring and their students didn't know how to work together, why should they try it again now?
Like I said before, I think that you have to persist as a teacher and understand that the students are going to need some support in transitioning to be able to communicate effectively in small groups. And one of the challenges with small group communication is that you can't be with every group at all times. So, you know, as Theresa said, you can monitor and have a sense of what's going on with the groups, but you are technically with one group at a time. So it's even more important that you help and support groups to learn how to communicate with each other, so that they're not waiting for you to cycle through 3 or 4 groups before you come to them and they're just not doing any work. So we really need to teach them how to do that. I would say transitioning a little bit in terms of how you structure groups. I think a lot of people ask me that, like, how should I structure my groups? Is there a better way that I could structure my groups than I did before? And it's really, you know, you could do it heterogeneously, homogeneously, based on skill level or any other attributes for that matter. But, and there's research that supports the formation of all those different types of groups. But I think the most important thing is that all of these groups, no matter, there's not going to be forming the perfect group. The idea is that you groups, you look at what's going on with those groups, and then you make targeted decisions on how to support each of one of those groups. When you first form groups, it's very unlikely that there's going to be equitable participation. But again, by working with groups over time, and this is the other thing that might be a little bit contrary to what people think, is my suggestion would be that you keep your groups together for a sustained period of time. If you keep on switching groups, that particular group is never going to learn how to work with each other, right? They're going to struggle working together. You're going to switch into a different group, and that group is going to struggle to work together. So by teaching kids and working with groups and addressing the particular issues that are going on with that particular group, you actually will minimize behavior issues, increase productivity, and the students will learn how to communicate with each other, but it does require them being together for a sustained period of time.
Very interesting insight there, Sarah. And as we wrap up here, what is one takeaway that you would both like to leave people with today from our discussion? And Theresa, if you could please go first.
I think the biggest takeaway is to consider your own pedagogy and consider the productive struggle that you want your students to have and the patience you want them to have with the technology. Give yourself the same grace. show that you can be showcasing productive struggle, and that you can give yourself grace when you're working through the technology. When students see a calm teacher and a teacher who's willing to try something new in the moment, they're more likely to do that. That's how we build these digital citizens. That's how we build these problem solvers with the technology, which translates to problem solving in the math.
Showing patience and grace is so important. Great advice for everybody watching this video. Sarah, any parting advice or takeaways that you would like to leave people with today as well?
I think reiterating what I said before about this idea that change takes time. And as teachers, we're studying and examining what our students are doing and how they're thinking and how they're interacting with each other, but we're also studying our own practice. And when we study our own practice, we're looking at what we're doing, we're looking how it impacts what the students are then doing, and seeing the changes that that can bring about. And I think with that persistence in supporting your students, what you find is it's just amazing that time that you like come on a group and they're having this incredible conversation, and you're like, you've gotten them to where you want. Not that they can't improve anymore, but just that teacher moment to hear them talking with each other about the mathematics, and it's feasible. It can happen. It's just stay committed to it in supporting your students.
This has been so insightful. Thank you, Sarah and Theresa, for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me as well.